Silence is often misunderstood. Many think it's just the absence of words, but in reality, silence is one of the most powerful forms of communication. When it comes to avoidant individuals, silence isn't just uncomfortable, it disrupts their entire way of relating to others. Avoidants are used to setting the pace, controlling the distance, and deciding when to engage. But when you step back and stay silent longer than they expected, something profound begins to happen inside them. They start to feel a shift that shakes the very foundation of their usual patterns. When you decide to stay silent longer than an avoidant expected, the very first reaction that stirs inside them is the shock of losing control. For a long time, they have operated under the assumption that they can withdraw, pull back, and even create distance whenever they feel threatened or overwhelmed, and you will always be there to bridge that gap. It gives them a sense of control over the relationship and the emotional rhythm between you. But silence is a language they do not expect you to master. When you stay quiet, when you no longer chase or question or fill in the empty spaces they leave behind, it begins to destabilize the very pattern they rely on to feel secure in their distance. This isn't about anger or punishment. It is about the unexpected disruption of a cycle that they thought only they could dictate. In those moments of silence, the avoidant begins to feel a strange tension. At first, they may dismiss it and convince themselves that you are simply giving them space. But as the silence stretches longer, a subtle panic begins to creep in. They start asking themselves why you haven't reached out, why the familiar rhythm of pursuit and withdrawal has suddenly stopped. For the first time, they are no longer certain of their place in your world. The control they once held begins to dissolve, and this sparks an inner conflict they don't easily admit to. The person who used to calm their anxieties by seeking reassurance is no longer doing so, and that leaves them feeling unsettled, exposed, and even vulnerable. What makes silence so powerful in this context is that it places the avoidant in unfamiliar territory. They are used to being the one who decides when closeness ends and when distance begins, but your silence interrupts this sense of authority. It's as though you've stepped off the predictable path and taken control of the map without saying a word. Suddenly, they are the one left wondering, waiting, and second guessing. This reversal is shocking because it forces them to acknowledge that you are not bound to their behavior. You have a will of your own, and your silence proves it. This shock of losing control often leads them to try and regain balance in subtle ways. They may test the waters with small gestures, indirect messages, or even passive attempts to draw your attention back. They are not comfortable with the idea of you being unresponsive because it reminds them that control was never truly theirs. It was something you allowed them to feel. The moment you step back and hold your silence, you remind them that the dynamic is shared, not dictated, and that realization is both powerful and disarming for them. In truth, the silence unsettles them more than confrontation ever could. Words can be explained, argued, or defended, but silence leaves no explanation, no reassurance, and no easy escape. It forces them to face themselves, and in doing so, they feel the loss of control they thought they had secured. When your silence lingers beyond what an avoidant expects, it doesn't just unsettle them, it sparks curiosity that slowly grows into obsession. Avoidants often rely on predictable behavior. They expect that if they pull away, you will reach for them. They expect that if they remain quiet, you will fill the silence with explanations, questions, or attempts to reconnect. When you don't do that, their mind begins to wander into spaces they usually avoid. Your silence forces them to think about you in ways they never intended to, because now the unanswered question lingers in their mind. What are you doing? What are you thinking? Why haven't you come back? This unknown creates a mental loop they can't easily escape, and with every hour that passes, the curiosity deepens. This curiosity, at first, is subtle. They may scroll through their phone expecting a message from you. They may glance at your social presence if they can, or they may replay your last interaction trying to figure out what shifted. But when the silence continues, it starts pressing against their natural tendency to suppress emotions. They begin wondering if you are choosing to move on, if you've replaced them, or if you've discovered your strength and no longer need to chase them. These thoughts are powerful because avoidants thrive on the comfort of distance while still holding on to the belief that you're tethered to them. When silence severs that tether, it creates a void and curiosity rushes in to fill it. The obsession grows because silence doesn't provide closure. Words can be dismissed, but silence is open-ended, and open-ended situations gnaw at the avoidant mind in unexpected ways. They may begin imagining scenarios of what you could be doing, who you might be talking to, and whether someone else has captured your attention. They might not admit it, but this quiet uncertainty eats at them. Your silence makes them feel watched, not by your eyes, but by their own inner thoughts that won't let them rest. Every time they expect you to reappear, and you don't, their attention locks tighter on you, until curiosity transforms into something far more consuming. This is the point where the avoidant, who usually seeks control, realizes they can't control the silence. They can't demand answers because they've created a pattern of pulling away themselves. They can't chase openly without contradicting their identity as the detached one. So instead, they watch quietly, internally restless, caught in the grip of wondering what you are thinking and why you no longer fit into their script. What started as silence from your side begins to echo louder in their mind than any words could have, because it raises questions they can't resolve. Eventually, curiosity becomes obsession because they crave the certainty your past behavior gave them. They want to know if they still matter, if they still hold a place in your thoughts, and if you will eventually return to soothe their discomfort. Until they have an answer, they remain hooked, trapped in the cycle of needing to know, and all of it was triggered by your choice to stay silent longer than they ever anticipated. When your silence lasts longer than what an avoidant expects, something even more powerful takes place. It acts as a mirror. Avoidants are experts at using withdrawal as a shield. They step back whenever closeness feels overwhelming, and in doing so, they avoid facing their own discomfort and emotions. But when you stay silent, they are suddenly confronted with the same emptiness they create for others. Your silence becomes a reflection of their own behavior, and this mirror effect is deeply unsettling. They begin to feel what it's like to be on the receiving end of the distance they so often impose, and that realization is not easy for them to digest. At first, they may dismiss your silence as indifference or assume you're simply giving them space. But as time passes, the mirror grows sharper. They start to sense the sting of being left without answers, without reassurance, and without emotional presence. It's the very experience they have unknowingly put others through, and now it's turned back on them. This is where the discomfort becomes heavy, because avoidants spend so much energy keeping emotions at arm's length, and suddenly they can't escape the reflection staring back at them through your silence. The mirror effect also exposes the fragile foundation beneath their avoidance. Many avoidants pride themselves on independence, on not needing others, and on being unaffected by emotional distance. But when you do not break the silence, the cracks in that self-image begin to show. They feel the unease of being ignored, the worry of being forgotten, and the subtle ache of wondering if you're gone for good. These are the very emotions they have tried to suppress in themselves and deny in others. Now your silence magnifies them in a way they can't simply dismiss. What makes this mirror so powerful is that it doesn't attack or accuse. It doesn't come with confrontation, anger, or blame. It simply exists, quietly reflecting back to them what their own patterns feel like. This lack of noise is precisely what makes it unavoidable. They can argue against words, but they cannot argue against silence. They can justify their withdrawal, but they cannot ignore the loneliness that creeps in when they are on the receiving end of it. Your silence forces them into an inner confrontation, one they may have avoided for years, and it leaves them with no easy escape. Over time, this mirror effect shifts something deep inside them. They begin to recognize that distance isn't as harmless as they've convinced themselves it is. They feel the discomfort of emptiness, the uncertainty of not knowing, and the vulnerability of being left without explanation. And although they may never admit it openly, this experience plants a seed of awareness. For the first time, they realize what it means to face themselves in the silence, and that lesson lingers far longer than they expect. When your silence stretches longer than an avoidant expects, it awakens one of their deepest hidden fears, the fear of being replaced. Avoidants often carry an illusion of safety in distance. They convince themselves that stepping back won't cost them much because the other person will still be there waiting. But when you remain quiet beyond their expectations, that illusion begins to crack. The thought that you might have shifted your energy elsewhere, that your attention may have found a new direction, or that someone else could now be standing in the place they once occupied, creeps into their mind. This thought is unsettling because it threatens their quiet confidence that you will always be available no matter how much space they demand. At first, this fear manifests subtly. They may casually check if you are still watching their life from afar, maybe scanning for signs that you're still present in the background. But as your silence lingers, the fear grows louder. Avoidants often suppress emotions of jealousy or insecurity, yet your silence forces those feelings to surface in ways they can't control. They begin to wonder whether you are investing your energy in someone else, whether you've finally realized your worth and chosen to move forward, or whether their silence has pushed you too far away. It becomes a spiral of what ifs, each one more unsettling than the last. This fear of replacement does more than trigger insecurity. It destabilizes the sense of power they once held in the connection. When avoidants pull away, they secretly rely on the idea that you won't. They expect that you will continue holding the bond while they distance themselves, giving them both safety and reassurance. But when you stop responding, you demonstrate that you are capable of moving on, of detaching, and of choosing yourself above them. This realization makes them question their own importance in your life. Suddenly, they are no longer certain if they hold the place they once assumed they did. The most powerful part of this silence is that it doesn't just make them fear losing you. It makes them imagine what life would be like without you. And in that imagination, insecurity takes root. They start to picture you with someone who appreciates you more, someone who gives you what they could not. And that thought is harder to dismiss than they'd like to admit. The longer the silence lasts, the more real this possibility feels, until it becomes an unspoken pressure pushing against their defenses. Even though avoidance may not show it outwardly, this fear quietly influences their behavior. They may attempt to re-establish contact in subtle ways, test your availability, or try to draw your attention back indirectly. It's not always because they're ready to change, but because the fear of replacement has unsettled the comfort they once felt. In your silence, they confront a truth they have long tried to avoid, that distance has consequences, and that love, attention, and presence are not guaranteed. This truth lingers within them as a quiet reminder that silence can carry more power than words ever could. When your silence continues longer than an avoidant anticipates, something begins to stir beneath their carefully built emotional walls, the awakening of feelings they usually suppress. Avoidants are skilled at detaching from emotions. They convince themselves that they don't need closeness, that feelings can be ignored, and that attachment is optional. But silence acts like a trigger that bypasses those defenses. Instead of providing comfort, the emptiness of your absence begins to bring emotions to the surface they didn't expect to feel. This awakening is not dramatic on the outside. It's quiet, gradual, and often hidden. But inside, it feels like cracks appearing in armor they thought was impenetrable. At first, this awakening feels confusing for them. They may suddenly feel restless without understanding why. Thoughts of you arise when they least expect it, in moments when they thought they had moved past needing anyone's presence. Your silence disrupts their emotional avoidance by making them sit with feelings instead of running from them. They start to notice the discomfort of missing you, the weight of wondering if you are gone, and even the ache of recognizing that they may have pushed too far. These are not emotions they allow themselves to feel easily, and the silence makes them unavoidable. What makes this awakening powerful is that it forces the avoidant into unfamiliar territory. Normally, they suppress feelings by keeping busy, distracting themselves, or convincing themselves they don't care. But silence doesn't give them closure or distraction. It lingers like a shadow that follows them everywhere. They begin to feel emotions they cannot control, and for an avoidant, loss of emotional control is deeply unsettling. Instead of silence being peaceful, it becomes loud inside their mind, amplifying all the emotions they tried to keep buried. Over time, this emotional awakening shifts into self-awareness. They may realize that they do, in fact, care more than they wanted to admit. They may recognize that your presence meant more than they allowed themselves to express. The longer you stay silent, the clearer these realizations become. Even if they don't act on these feelings immediately, the truth remains your absence has awakened something they cannot push back into hiding. It's as though silence gave them no choice but to face the emotions they've denied. What's most striking is that this awakening doesn't come from confrontation or pressure. It comes from your quiet strength. You didn't argue, you didn't beg, and you didn't try to force them into awareness. Instead, you let the silence speak, and in that stillness, they had no choice but to feel. This makes the awakening even more powerful because it doesn't feel imposed. It feels like something rising naturally from within them. For someone who has spent so long controlling emotions, this loss of control becomes a profound shift. Your silence awakens in them a recognition of their vulnerability, a reminder of their humanity, and an undeniable awareness of the emotions they thought they could outrun. And once awakened, those feelings cannot simply disappear. They linger, quietly reshaping how they see you, themselves, and the connection they once believed they could control. When you remain silent longer than an avoidant expects, something subtle but incredibly powerful happens. The balance of power shifts. Avoidants often feel secure because they assume they control the rhythm of the connection. They believe they can decide when to withdraw, when to come close, and when to disappear without consequences, because deep down they expect you to always be the one who bridges the gap. Your silence changes this dynamic entirely. By refusing to chase, explain, or beg, you show them that the control they thought they had was never truly theirs. It was something you allowed. And the moment you choose silence, you quietly reclaim that power. At first, this reversal catches them off guard. They may not consciously admit it, but your lack of response makes them feel as though the ground has shifted beneath them. They are used to being pursued after creating distance, and when that pursuit doesn't happen, they are forced to notice that you are no longer playing by their rules. Suddenly, the dynamic is not centered around their comfort, it's centered around your choices. This realization can be unsettling because it challenges the avoidance belief that they dictate the terms of closeness and separation. The power of your silence lies in its simplicity. Without words, you communicate that you value yourself enough not to chase someone who withdraws. Without confrontation, you reveal that you are strong enough to hold space without needing their validation. And without effort, you create a new standard that connection is not one-sided and that your presence cannot be taken for granted. This is where the shift of power becomes undeniable, because you are no longer waiting for them to lead. You have chosen to step out of the dance entirely, and in doing so, you redefine the relationship dynamic. As this shift unfolds, the avoidant begins to feel something they don't expect: respect. Though they may resist it at first, deep down, they recognize strength when they see it. Your silence tells them that you are not afraid of losing them, that you are not dependent on their approval, and that you are capable of walking away with dignity intact. This strength contrasts sharply with the pattern they're used to, where others often chase after their withdrawal. That difference plants a seed in their mind, a recognition that you hold power not by controlling them, but by controlling yourself. Over time, this shift in power can change the way they perceive you entirely. Instead of seeing you as someone who will always be available, they begin to view you as someone they must not take lightly. Your silence forces them to re-examine the dynamic and realize that the power they once felt in distancing themselves is no longer theirs alone. You have shown, without a single word, that you are the one who decides how much of yourself you give, and that realization leaves a lasting mark. Silence, when used with strength and intention, becomes more than the absence of words. It becomes a force that reshapes the entire dynamic with an avoidant. By choosing not to chase, not to fill the gaps they create, and not to surrender your energy to their patterns, you communicate a message louder than